The chilly November wind seemed to penetrate everywhere. It got under his tightly buttoned coat, then under his shirt, settled on his chest and caused a persistent desire to get away from here. But you can't, because a promise to his daughter is sacred. You have to be patient. And she, as if she didn't notice the prickly weather, pulled him along with her, twirling her head in a fluffy hat. Anton shivered for the 10th time and asked for the 20th time, "Ellen, well, look what beautiful rabbits. White, can we buy one?" "I don't want a rabbit." "Dad, how can you not understand? They're stupid," and stubbornly walked on. The sellers at the market were just like the weather. The same frowning, unfriendly, dressed in overcoats and probably wanted the day to be over as soon as possible. His daughter dragged him through rows of birds, kittens, rodents, and puppies of all breeds and colors. Occasionally, she stopped in front of clear aquariums with creepy-looking furry spiders, thought about something, and then continued her search again. "Now, young miss, I absolutely insist that you explain to your father exactly what you are looking for." Anton took his daughter away from the shoppers and sat down next to her. "We've been walking around for an hour or so, and one of us is bound to get sick. You promised to buy me a friend for my birthday," frowned the girl. "I don't disagree, but we were talking about a kitten or a puppy, and I do not want a puppy or a kitten. And what does my insufferable princess want for her 8th birthday? I don't know." Alina frowned even more, something different, not like everyone else. Anton remembered the showcase with spiders, near which she stopped recently and inwardly shuddered. "Let's take a rabbit, they are beautiful, and your girlfriends do not have such, you will brag at school." "I told you they were stupid." She was sincerely perplexed that she had to repeat such obvious things to her grown-up father. Anton sighed heavily, making a decision. "That's right, my dear. Another half an hour and we're going home. If you don't choose anyone, then you won't get a birthday present." "That's not fair." "So what? You've got half an hour." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line. Her chin twitched and her eyes swelled with impending tears. "Don't even try it." Like probably every father, Anton had been through this kind of blackmail many times before, but now he wasn't about to let up. It was very cold and nasty outside. So the man stood up, took her hand and led her further along the rows. They passed the terrariums with snakes, thank God, past the frozen stone sculptures of chameleons. "Dad, they are boring." Reached the end and turned right, the last frontier of the animal fair. According to the unwritten law of every market, there were fewer people there, the selection was poorer, but the prices were cheaper. A few steps later, Elia stopped near a cage covered with a thick blanket. On top, on a piece of dirty Scotch tape that was about to tear off, was attached a notebook with sprawling letters. The girl scrutinized the inscription for a few seconds, then tried to say it to herself, moving only her lips. She frowned in surprise at such a strange name and carefully pronounced it aloud. Mzglya. She tugged her father's sleeve, who was distracted by something, and repeated the unusual word again, but more confidently. "Mzglya. Dad? What's Mzglya? What? There's no such word. Where did you?" "The word may not exist, but the animal does," interrupted by a cold voice coming from behind the counter. Anton looked around confused, saw no one and stared incredulously at the cage. "Excuse me?" He was answered by a very noisy sniffing, grunting, and above the dark green sales countertop showed a thickly overgrown bearded face, covered with a black knit cap. The salesman was a little taller than the girl. He still fiddled around, obviously stood on something, which made him a little taller, but still barely reached Anton's chest. "My grandfather bred them and my great-grandfather. They helped them a lot in the mines." "Mzglya?" Anton repeated after his daughter. "That's the one. I've never heard of such an animal." "In the mines, you said?" The man sneezed raspily, wiping his nose with the greasy sleeve of his down jacket, which had once been white. "Yeah, in them. They can smell danger from a mile away, like a cave-in or gas all of a sudden. And it's better with them. It's more fun." He suddenly stopped, was silent for a moment, and only after a couple of seconds added, It was, "Why are you selling it if it's more fun? I'm old and the last of ours. I'll die soon. And she's still young, she's still a cattle, so I wouldn't say that about you, I wouldn't give you more than 50. Our whole family is like that," grinned the man. "My father was attracted to girls until he was 100 years old. He was a little tall, but he had chud in his veins." "I see," Anton answered, puzzled. "So, can I look at your animals?" "Why not look? I covered it so that it wouldn't catch cold, you see what the weather is like." The bearded seller pulled the cover from his side and Anton saw a small furry animal, dozing on the grassy floor of the cage. About the size of a kitten, it looked like a mix of a guinea pig and a hamster, with a long elongated face almost like a fox's. Its light brown fur-covered flanks heaved in time with its deep breathing. "Unusual, but on the whole quite a nice hamster," Anton noted to himself. However, something else, some elusive strangeness in the appearance of the sleeping rodent, persistently scratched his subconscious. The man blinked a few times, shaking his head a little, and looked at his daughter, who stood up on tiptoe and studied the unusual animal. "And Mzglya, what is that? You know, a breed or a name?" At the sound of his voice, the overgrown hamster opened bright orange beady eyes, looked at him and yawned slightly, exposing the edges of his needle-sharp teeth. Then it stirred, waking up finally, and two pairs of thin spider legs covered with the same light brown fur separated from its sides. While they were pressed against the torso, it was almost impossible to see them, but now the beast stretched them out to all sides as if stretching, yawned again, this time with its mouth wide open, and made a loud purring sound. After this performance, it rested its paws on the floor, lifted itself up, and four more, quite ordinary, short-clawed feet appeared from below. She stood on them, folded the additional limbs, and turned her muzzle to her master. "Muryav. It's their breed name, don't ask who invented it. Maybe my great-grandfather knew, or maybe he invented it who'd recognize him now. Yeah. Muryav, what do you want? What are you looking at me for? Featherweight, wait a minute." The man disappeared with a grunt under the counter, rustled something, reappeared, clutching in his hand a piece of beige crumbly halva. "She likes sweets in her sleep, asshole. I can't help it, I spoil the wretch." He opened the door and held out the treat to Mzglya. She took it carefully with her front paws and sat down on her heel. It almost toppled over backward, but the spider's legs straightened lightning fast, resting on the floor. Completely dumbfounded, Anton watched how the creature unknown to him until that day, sprawled as if in an armchair, happily munching his favorite peanut halva. And the grandfather, and his eyes, just a panopticon, from contemplation of this creepy cuteness, was pulled out by his daughter, who had been shaking him frantically by the sleeve for a minute. Dad, do you hear? I want him. It's she." Anton corrected himself and immediately realized, "What do you mean, I want? Mother will have a heart attack if we bring it home." "Yes, and did you see what teeth? What if it bites?" He was almost sorry they'd passed the spider tank. "It doesn't bite. She's kind. How would you know?" Actually, intervened the salesman, the girl is right. Kinder than them, I have not met animals, especially to children. He can look after her, if anything, better than any dog. When I was a kid, my daddy used to carry cones from the forest, husk them, and put nuts in a pile. And then we used to eat them together on the porch. He was a smart ass. Too bad the village mutts tore him apart. The bitches. They're tough, but they took him too badly. He didn't make it. Yeah. The man was silent, staring into the void. "Dad, let's buy it. Please, you promised." To tell the truth, Anton also liked this strange hamster, even despite the scary spider legs. And the expression on his face with its unusual orange eyes was anything but silly. He sighed, anticipating a little scandal at home. "How old is she?" "She's young, I told you, only 2 years old. They live like those turtles of yours. 100 years. Whoa. Yeah. She's gonna be taking care of your grandkids for years to come. Will she grow up to be big? If nothing happens, she'll stay that way, maybe a little more. I don't know. Anton stretched out, not paying attention to the reservation, and looked at his daughter. Do you realize that Mom will kill us? No, she won't. I'll tell her that I cried. And you had to buy. She'll say, yeah. Does your brain have a name? He turned to the salesman again. Of course it has a name. Bizha. Beads, exclaimed the girl enthusiastically. I don't think she'll mind. The man grinned. Mzglya had already finished her treat and listened attentively, translating her face to each speaker. Well, do you take it? We'll take it as we go alongside Anton again doomedly. How much? $500. Huh, not bad for you. Anton had money. Despite the recent collapse of the country and widespread unemployment, he managed to hustle and organized several outlets near the subway. Furthermore, now business was booming, and next month he was going to open 3 more stalls near the neighboring station. But the sum was still not insignificant. I'll give you 300. The salesman squinted at him and nodded contentedly, as if this haggling was to his liking. 400 and we'll call it a deal. 350 and I'll give it to you in dollars. It's a deal. But, give me some instructions. How to feed it, how to take care of it, and all that. I'll tell you everything. Don't worry. It's nothing complicated. The bearded man opened the cage and gently took the animal across the body. With one hand, he pressed it against him, closing the door with the other. Well, my beast, we have found you a new home. Don't embarrass me. Behave yourself, understand? The beast listened attentively, then pressed his muzzle against his master's chest. The spider legs on his back straightened and hugged his bushy beard. Muryav, let you be upset, silly. People are kind, I can see that right away, you know. Mryav. If I die, what will happen to you, you fool? Where will you go? His paws clenched tighter, gathering the man's lush vegetation in a pile. It may have seemed to Anton, but the rough, as if carved with an axe, face of the seller trembled, and somewhere in the depths of his eyes, inflamed with cold something, glittered. Or maybe they were just tears. The disease, by the looks of it, was just gaining momentum. The bearded man got down from his makeshift perch, walked around the counter, and stood near the girl, being taller than her by only a head. Can you take care of Bizha? I can. Are you sure? I promise. But, if anything, Daddy will help, right? The master turned to Anton. Of course he will, grinned at him wherever he goes. Good, nodded the seller, returning to the girl. What's your name? Alina. It's a beautiful name, Greek. Meet Bizha, this is Alina. Now she'll look after you and you'll look after her. He, with a visible effort to tear the animal from his beard, and held it out towards the girl. Anton tensed a little, ready, in case of anything, to immediately rush to his daughter's defense. But the overgrown hamster only actively wiggled his nose, noisily sucking in air. Muryav, now pick her up and put her on your shoulder. Don't be afraid. Elia gently picked up Bizha and, holding her breath with delight, slowly brought the animal to the designated spot. Mzglya also carefully stepped from the palms of her hands, pressed her spider legs against the girl's neck, from which she could not resist, and giggled, climbed over her. And, as Anton noted to himself, she never once released her claws, despite the slippery surface of the jacket. And all the time she balanced and kept her balance with the help of those very scary legs. Barely having established herself in a new place, Bizha poked her nose into her ear, which caused a new laugh, and then went under her hat, burrowing into her long dark hair. She's memorizing your scent, so she'll always know where you are. Why? The caveman past is in the blood. It's how we found kin in the mines if someone got lost suddenly. Dwarf. He's a real dwarf. All the way back home, his daughter fiddled tirelessly in the back seat of the car with a new live toy. As the strange seller said, although, of course, compared to his animal, he was more than normal. No special conditions of keeping Busa did not need any special conditions. She could live in a cage, but it was not worth to close it there, as Mzglya are very active, curious, and do not like to sit in one place for a long time. In terms of nutrition, everything was also very simple. Bizha could eat almost everything, starting from cat food and finishing with mashed potatoes and cutlets. She especially liked peanut halva, but with cucumbers it was better to be careful. They threatened her with indigestion, with all, as they say, ensuing, and as a toilet, the man, well, Anton could not call him an old man, advised to take an ordinary cat litter box with sawdust. Torn newspapers are better not to use. This fool will play with them. She'll spread her piss all over the house. Odd character, though, and the bearded man, and that bearded man's eyes. It happens. There was no scandal at home, but not because my mother reacted calmly to the strange animal. Quite the opposite. At first, she began to smile when her daughter put a big fluffy hamster on the floor in the hallway. "Here, Businka, this is your home now. Meet Mommy." But when the charming creature suddenly grew 4 more long, curved, furry legs and climbed vertically on the wall, obviously began to explore the new house, Marina rolled her eyes and quietly slipped into a faint. "Awesome, Dad. That's cool," mesmerized, whispered the girl, watching the businesslike Mzglya already on the ceiling. Bizha. Anton only hummed and hurried to the bathroom for ammonia. With the help of children's tears and men's ironclad confidence that the furry animal is harmless, Mom was finally persuaded. Their large apartment consisted of 2 adjacent, 3-room, so the first time it was not so often fell on Mom's eyes. And after Marina saw that Bizha every morning leaves the room to escort Elia to school, sensitive female nature trembled. Slowly, the little furry monster became a frequent guest in the kitchen. It liked to sit and very carefully observe the preparation of the next lunch or dinner. Only sometimes Businka timidly touched the pant leg with her nose, asking to share with her, followed by the invariable Mryav. But the main break in their relationship happened after Marina accidentally swept a fork from the table and Bizha, grasping it with small clawed paws, rose on his spider legs, climbed up the wall, put it back on the table, exactly where it had fallen from. Mryav. It was her unqualified victory. Since then, she'd even been allowed to sit on a chair, and the number of little treats had almost doubled. Anton at first even tried to train her, teaching her various commands. However, he quickly realized that it was hopeless, because the furry infestation certainly understood everything, but considered it beneath his dignity to give a paw or bring slippers. And after the command sit, and looked at Anton, with a clear doubt in his mental abilities. Silently she turned around and went to her cage. Only another portion of halva could restore peace. When Elia returned home, Businka invariably met the girl in the hallway, purring happily and demanding the obligatory hugs. She climbed on her mistress's shoulder, listening to everything that happened at school. They went to wash up together, sat down to eat lunch, and in the evenings they played hide and seek, and Bizha ran along the corridors, tapping with all 8 legs, looking for the best hiding place, while Elia was counting loudly from her room. 1, 2, 3. Trouble came in the spring just before the May holidays, though at first everything was even very good. On March 8th, Elia received a whole toy house, where Businka was immediately moved in, and she even seemed to be satisfied with the move. Otherwise, why would she have immediately dragged grass from the cage into the miniature living room? Anton gave his wife an incredibly expensive gold watch, which of course also caused a storm of delight. And a little later, drunk on champagne, shared with Marina the news that soon he will have a meeting with high people. And then, perhaps not exactly, but very likely, my dear, he will turn, let it from a wealthy, but still shopkeeper, to co-owner of the shopping center, the construction of which was planned to begin soon. And then their life would begin to be completely different. At the beginning of April, everything went downhill. The long-awaited meeting took place, but the result was as far from the desired. That day Anton returned home much later than usual, almost at night. Gloomy, angry, and drunk, lying in bed with Businka under her side, Elia listened to the tense conversation of her parents in the kitchen, which reached her in separate phrases. She didn't understand why Daddy didn't need someone else's roof anymore, and was even afraid for a moment that now they would have to live on the street. He was swearing nonstop and saying a lot of bad words. Really bad words that she had only heard a few times from boys in high school. All she could figure out in the end was that Daddy was being forced to sell something very bad in the tents. And it was the roof that was to blame. And as long as he was selling fucking grim death, no one would deal with him. How you can trade in death, and even frowning, the girl also did not understand. But what scared her was when her mom started crying and begging her dad to leave it alone. After that, Daddy began to yell at Mommy. Then the girl closed her eyes tightly, pressed Businka to herself, and lay awake for a long time, thinking how to reconcile parents. But in the morning, there was no trace of the night storm. Only a little swollen Mom's eyes. The next day, Anton came home as usual, but drunk again, and told Mom that they had to leave. He bought 2 tickets for them to Peter. The train leaves in the morning. His friends will meet them there. They'll take them to Finland, where he's already rented a house for the summer. As soon as he settles some things, he will come to them at once. Elia was happy about the unexpected vacation, and her mom started crying and yelling at her dad again for some reason. All this was very strange, and the girl did not understand what to do about it. So she just sat on the bed with her legs tucked up and talked to Bizha, trying not to hear her parents. Dad came in once, raked her things out of the closet without looking, and left. Dinner passed in tense silence. The silence was broken only by Businka, who ran restlessly from room to room. Perhaps she sensed the coming changes, or maybe the general nervousness was transmitted to her, or... The train left at 8 a.m., so we went to bed early enough. Although the parents' bedroom was far away, the girl thought that her mom started crying again, and her dad was mumbling something, trying to calm her down. The girl woke up in the middle of the night to a scream. Elia lay still for a while, listening to the sounds in the apartment. Alien male voices alternated with muffled thumps, mixed with her mother's tearing sobs. Still sleepy, she got out of bed, picked up Bizha, who was sitting near the door, turned the knob and left the room. What the girl saw, child psychologists usually call it a severe mental trauma and try in every possible way to rid the child of such memories. In the large living room, combined with the kitchen, there were a total of 7 people. 2 in black leather jackets were kicking Anton, who was lying at the dining table in a fetal position with his hands on his head. 1, in a tracksuit, held Marina by the throat, pinning her against the wall. He had a knife in his other hand. 2 others stood a little to the side, watching what was happening. They all looked like twin brothers. The same short haircuts, almost the same height, and all of them had a gleam in their eyes at the pleasure of being able to punish a fucking major who had forgotten to whom he owed everything. Elia froze in the middle of the hallway, her brown eyes wide open to the very mental trauma that was already grinding her childhood mind. Mom? Marina saw her daughter, rushed to her, but earned only a long cut on her cheek and a knee strike to her butt. She sobbed in pain and sank to the floor. The one who held her turned around, saw the girl, and barked briefly. "Why are you standing up? Get the girl out of here. Lock her up somewhere." One of the fighters moved down the corridor toward the terrified child. He barely caught a glimpse of movement before a lump of viciously hissing rage hit him in the chest. A second later, the dazed man felt 2 very thick needles enter his throat, under his lower jaw, from both sides. 2 more stabbed into his ears, piercing through his eardrums. And then short but very sharp claws began to tear at his face. He shrieked in a sudden falsetto as white streams of burst eyeballs began to flow from under his lacerated eyelids. His cheeks sagged with a scarlet fringe, blood spatter and chunks of pink meat flying in every direction, as if an unknown creature had tried to drill him from top to bottom. The poor thing clutched at the furry, snarling creature that was causing him so much pain in an unsuccessful attempt to pull it away from him. "What the fuck is this?" Exhaled in amazement. He jumped to his comrade, tried to grab the blood-stained Bizha. The hate-pulsing lump of muscle twisted in his hands, snapped its toothy jaw, and 3 fingers of his left hand fell to the floor with a thud. "Bitch! Bitch! Sucka!" The brothers who had been beating Anton broke away from their occupation. "Can't you guys handle a cat?" The first one was already lying on his back with his arms spread out and convulsing. His whole face was a mess of torn skin with white streaks of bone. The other, clutching his mangled arm to his chest, snarled angrily. "What fucking cat? It bit off half my palm." Bizha broke away from her victim, flew up to the ceiling with a candle, ran across it, leaving a dotted line of red trails behind her, and fell on the head of the man who was holding Marina. His teeth snapped again, and a trail of blood ran down his neck from where his ear used to be. He twisted in place, trying to knock Businka to the floor. Marina crawled over to her husband, who was lying motionless, and covered him with her arms. Elia was still standing in the hallway, mouth open in a mute scream. Mzglya jumped aside, hung on the wall, and a moment later was already on the shoulder of a black leather jacket. She snatched a decent chunk of leather off her neck, jumped off, and landed near her lying parents. It swayed from side to side on its tall, spidery legs, and hissed viciously with its bloody maw. Only 3 of the 5 strangers remained in formation, 2 in their jackets and 1 still clutching a knife. Without conspiring, they pulled out short, worn Makarovs and pointed the barrels at the tiny protector of the house. She jumped forward, but the first bullet threw the light body back. Marina shuddered when she heard the shots. She squeezed her head into her shoulders and crawled toward the corridor, toward her daughter. Bizha struggled to get up, growled, and jumped again. The living room had turned into a veritable short-range shooting range. Chaotically moving around the living room, the Mzglya pounced on the brothers with all the furious speed she could muster. Leather jackets hung in shreds, small pools of blood collected under the bitten legs. But the chances of a small, albeit unusual predator were almost non-existent. 2 hits at once tore its body almost in half. Businka fell not far from Anton, bickered, blowing bloody bubbles, and still tried to get up, leaning on trembling, curved long legs. The one without an ear came over and with a vindictive grin, with all his might, brought his boot down on the bleeding beast. There was a crunch of small bones and the bright orange eyes of the beady bead went blank, twitching darkly. Then he looked around at the whole picture and spat irritably on the floor. Marina was lying stretched out along the opposite wall, only half a meter from the saving corridor. Just above her temple was a small bullet hole. The wound was already covered with blood, and that dark maroon snake was slowly creeping downward. Anton was a little luckier, only his shoulder and leg were hit. He stirred and moaned faintly. "We have to go," said the owner of the jacket torn by sharp teeth. "The cops have probably been called for a shooting." He approached the owner of the house and made a control shot in the head. "Yuri Borisik is not gonna like this. What the fuck were our options?" Both of them looked at their mutilated comrade, who had already fallen silent and gave no sign of life. "Stasian is a pity. Bitch, how come? It was no big deal, just come and kill him, that's all." The one who was left without fingers, writhing in pain, began to collect them from the floor and nodded toward the girl. "We'll leave, but what are we going to do with the little one? She's a witness." They looked at each other, hesitating to make a decision. "I don't kill children." Finally, one of them couldn't stand it. "And I won't let you. We'll take her with us. Let Borisik decide." It's a bad option, but everyone agrees. "Put bags on your feet, or we'll get a mess on the stairs. There's blood all over the floor. We'll have to leave by shuriken. Look for a rug in the rooms, we'll rapstas. Just hurry the fuck up." The adrenaline storm was almost over and he was starting to get nervous. It was as if Elia had woken up and screamed with all the strength of her small lungs. The sound of a child's voice cut unpleasantly into her ears. The one who was against the murder came up to the girl, slapped her hard, and she fell to the floor unconscious. A second thug in a leather jacket brought a light-colored, short-pile palace from the far room. They laid their comrade's body on it and wrapped it up, turning it into a large cigar. The one without an ear threw the girl's almost weightless body on his shoulder. The other 2, grunting and cursing in a low voice, shouldered the carpet. A few minutes later, a man with his arm wrapped in a sports jacket peeked out of the entryway. After making sure that there was no one around, he trotted off into the night gloom. A minute later, a white minivan with "Hobo" written on the rear window pulled up to the driveway. Grimacing in pain, the driver jumped out of the car, opened the side doors, waited for his accomplices to load in, slammed them shut, and got back behind the wheel. Tires shrieking, the tramp sped forward, nearly knocking off the side mirrors of the cars parked along the side of the house. The news of the bloodbath in the apartment of the neighbor of the entrepreneur quickly spread throughout the house. The verdict was made almost immediately: a gangster's showdown. Because you can't make that kind of money with honest labor. 2 bodies packed in black polyethylene were taken away only in the morning. An APB was issued on the missing girl. Criminalists worked in the apartment until almost lunchtime, collecting everything that could help to find out what happened here. The body of the crushed hamster was also packed in a bag and given to the janitor on the way out. It wouldn't rot there after all. The aged Semyon Ignatievic thought of nothing else but to dig with the bayonet of his shovel in the nearest front garden and bury the poor animal under the drizzling rain in the lowering twilight of the next day. That was it. Could have been. But the wacky salesman was a bit of a liar when describing the fate of Carrot Top, Busy's father. Although, as a slip of the tongue, he could not have predicted such an outcome of events. No way. No, Rizik was really torn by the village dogs, and in the hands of the inconsolable boy got a tortured pet. But his mother only smiled and advised to bury him behind the house, shallowly in the ground. And wait, and she started packing her things, preparing to leave for some reason. And they really had to move to a new place in a hurry, because the next night Carrot Top came back. All dirty, grown almost 3 times as big, covered with fresh scars. He broke down the front door of the hut and proudly threw the severed dog's head at his master's feet. In just a few minutes, following him, trouble loomed in the windows, accompanied by the nervous beams of streetlights and the unhappy cries of neighbors disturbed by the night's carnage. They had no difficulty in finding the culprit from the bloody footprints. I had hoped that we would live here longer. Ugh, the abyss. And so now, in the morning, where Semyon had buried Bizha, the ground swelled into a black bubble, spreading apart. From there, a long, narrow mouth appeared, greedily swallowing black, wet lumps. Then the whole face came out, unnaturally flattened on one side. Instead of the right eye, there was a skin-covered, gaping hole, but the other burned a dark ruby. Looking around, Bizha continued to devour the ground, growing bigger and bigger right in front of her eyes. After a few minutes, she stopped, noisily sucked in air with her nose, snorted, and began to climb out. First came the curved spider's legs, almost as thick as a pencil. They stabbed at the sides, dragging the rest of the torso, the size of a soccer ball. Dirty fur was missing in places, giving way to gaps with fresh scars of pink skin. Mzglya shook herself like a dog, sniffed once more, growled unhappily again, and began to twist in place. At last, she caught a faint string of a familiar odor. She ran to the entrance, stopped briefly where a white minivan had been parked not so long ago. Girl, mistress. She was afraid. Mzglya could feel it. She was also surrounded by those who came into their home, those who made her change. Her long, furry legs straightened, throwing her body forward and upward, into the embrace of the gray pre-dawn sky. Now Bizha could clearly see the road along which Alina had been taken. In the ugly, one-eyed head, only one thought was beating. Soon, girl. I'm on my way. Soon. Fast Info newspaper issue number 5 May shock. Mysterious death of a criminal mastermind. Huge hamster with wings killed 18 people and kidnapped a child. Execution or breakfast, or execution for breakfast. Sensational material. Read in our issue.